Thank you very much, everybody. Pleasure to be here. I was on the plane. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta. I'm actually somebody who was born in Calgary, and it was just someone, and they say, you know, you'll like Prince George. I've never been here before. It's culturally like Alberta, and I have to say I do feel very at home. I just was talking to Susan, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, and we thought maybe we'd try to get the crowd to do the wave before we start. So we got to start with you guys, to me, to here, around. You ready? On three. 1, 2, 3. Okay, once more. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that wasn't bad. As Kevin said, I'm the CEO and the Managing Director of the Canadian Energy Centre. You will have some brochures from us that show some of the work that we do. If anyone needs more, yep, there it is. You can get them out here at the registration desk, I think. We are an arm's length independent corporation of the government of Alberta. And really what we were assigned to do and what we do is to engage in a fact-based, rational conversation about global energy mix. We do this, our tools include fact-based editorial and commentary, high-quality peer-reviewed research, and both national and international marketing campaigns. Now, I think my slide's up there. I'm not sure if it is or not. But we have a national campaign that is ongoing now, has been since March. You may have seen the ads. It's called Made the Canadian Way. And basically what it is it talks about oil and gas specifically, that if you peeled back the label, you would learn some great things about the industry, the commitment to clean tech, the opportunity for Indigenous communities, water use, those sorts of things. Basically, the ad is, you want to know your Nike shoes aren't made in a sweatshop, you want to know your diamonds aren't blood diamonds. If you used Canadian energy, here's what you would learn. We're in the United States with a campaign that we call Look North for Energy Security. And this started the first time that President Biden appealed to the OPEC Plus countries to increase oil production. And we were like, well, we're right here. We can provide it. This was shortly after killing KXL as well. And we've had some great success in terms of the metrics, moving people who have recalled the ads, who once they understand that a lot of the Americans, according to our research, don't understand that they're not energy self-sufficient. And we tell them we can be a provider of oil. They say, of course, it's got to come from Canada. We have been around the world. We do targeted digital campaigns, the G7 in Germany in June, COP27 in Egypt in November, the ONS conference, otherwise known as the Offshore Northern Seas Conference in Norway this summer, and the International Energy Summit in the UK in September. And we get millions of hits. We plot the metrics. We don't do anything on instinct. We poll and we talk in a very fact-based way about our industry here. And one of the themes is our ability to reduce emissions around the world. I mean, I say it consistently, and no one really disputes it. If we can get our natural gas to coal-burning jurisdictions, we have an immediate impact on greenhouse gas emissions, and that's what we're all looking for. I'm going to now turn to Susan Gagnon. Susan joined MNP in 2022 after serving as Assistant Dean Communications for the Faculty of Forestry at UBC and Vice President Communications and Research at Coast Forest Product Association. Susan is a passionate advocate for the natural resource sector, in particular, how it provides economic, social, and environmental benefits now and into the future. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for an exciting discussion on the subject of innovation in BC's natural gas production. Before we begin, I'd first like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Lheidli Dene First Nation. And I'd also like to acknowledge Sarah Weber and her C3 Alliance Core team for another successful BC Natural Resources Forum, and congratulate all of them on their 20th anniversary. That's a big achievement. On behalf of MNP, I appreciate the opportunity to moderate a panel for all of you this morning. With a national footprint and a deep understanding of local markets, M&P's Energy Services team recognizes that to stay competitive and profitable in Canada's evolving energy sector, companies need to make the right business decisions at the right time. Our team brings extensive experience providing process improvement, organizational development, and regulatory support to enhance performance of companies in this sector. Achieving innovation is an exciting and hopeful topic. It's about realizing our aspirations and goals. Natural gas production is faced with a growing number of challenges, including the need to factor in climate change. But as we all know, these challenges are really exciting and tremendous opportunities for growth. It encourages producers to constantly explore new frontiers and continually improve their production techniques, all the while bringing costs down and reducing their environmental impact. Balancing the need to remain competitive while tackling today's energy issues and securing tomorrow's energy solutions takes strength and commitment, which lies in the ongoing process of innovation. And that's what we're going to hear from our panel today. I'd like to introduce them, and they've kindly offered to share their insights on this topic of innovation. Please note that you can find their full bios on WUVA. So first off, I'd like to introduce Richard Wong. Richard is the Director of Regulatory and Operations for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CAPP. I'd next like to introduce Cam Anderson. Cam is a Senior VP of Commercial and Corporate Development for NorthRiver Midstream. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Blaney. She is the Government Relations Manager for Ovintiv. And I'd also like to introduce Scott Volk, who's the Director of Technology and Innovation at Tourmaline. Please give him a hand. I'd like to give our panel now the opportunity to provide opening remarks.
Great, thank you, Susan, and thanks so much for having us here at the Natural Resources Forum. It's actually my first time here in Prince George, and I've really enjoyed my time. It's been a great opportunity to really interface not just with governments and Indigenous nations and local communities, but also with other sectors in the natural resource sector as well. So. I guess first off, I'm really pleased to be up here on the stage with Cam and Scott and Jen, not just because they know what they're talking about more than I probably do, but I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting discussion. From my perspective, I think what I'd like for folks to leave with from here today is a better understanding of how BC is really on the cusp of becoming one of the most important energy export hubs in the world. Susan talked a bit about this, but from an upstream perspective, new development techniques are helping us to increase production while reducing our emissions. Practices are helping us to reduce our surface disturbance, water use, and expedite restoration. And overall, BC's natural gas production has really always been driven by innovation, and it certainly will continue to be. My fellow panelists will be able to describe more specific examples, but in general, BC production today is lower in emissions than it ever has been before, and results in a smaller footprint. If I take a step back from the BC picture for just a moment, the world has changed really dramatically in the past year, and traditional energy markets have really been permanently transformed. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the associated weaponization of energy is really creating what is in effect a two-market system for energy. Those countries that will no longer buy Russian oil and gas, and those countries that will. And certainly the speed of Europe's response to this crisis has been really quite astounding. After only a few short months of production, Germany in December of 2022 opened their first LNG import facility. And I think I read in the news that just a couple of weeks ago that their second such facility opened as well. And in 2022, we saw the US, which is the largest exporter of LNG in the world, shifting the majority of their flows of LNG cargoes primarily to Europe from Asia. And so it's in that context that Canada's abundant, secure, and reliable natural gas is really becoming more and more important for our allies and our trading partners around the world, and that presents a really strategic opportunity for British Columbia. You heard yesterday during the fireside chat from LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink, and that those two projects are drawing close to completion. And the LNG industry on the West Coast is really turning BC into that international energy hub that I referred to. And that presents a major opportunity for us on the upstream side to grow natural gas production in the northeast part of the province. But in order to capture that opportunity, it needs to be done right, and it needs to be done responsibly. And I hope you take away hope you take away an idea of some of the measures that these companies are taking and others to achieve that goal. To us, responsibility really means acting and making significant progress on climate. It also means partnering with Indigenous communities and businesses and ensuring that industry can be a source of prosperity for everyone in the province. And so with that, I'm pleased to highlight a few key findings of a new BC oil and gas supply chain community investment study called Our Communities Care, which we just launched this morning. And it looked at our member spend across the province. The report captured $4.7 billion of expenditures that were spent on goods and services on BC natural gas operations, with more than 2,400 BC-based operators, either located in or affiliated with some 140 BC municipalities and Indigenous nations. From 2018 to 2021, our companies contracted on average 400 businesses per year across the province, from the Peace region to the Lower Mainland to places like Creston and Duncan. And obviously the Peace region had the most supply chain benefits from BC's natural gas sector. Fort St. John itself accounted for 52% of the total supply chain benefits reported by our members. But the report also highlighted a number of other spending categories, in particular $260 million that's been spent in reclamation and remediation expenditures, and $17 million in community investments between 2018 and 2021. And finally, and in addition to these local benefits, our industry will contribute nearly $2.5 billion in royalties to BC this fiscal year. And while it's easy to talk about a lot of these fiscal and economic benefits for the resource sector in isolation, we need to have an industry that is sustainable and equitable and future-oriented, because if we can't meet the standards that British Columbians expect, our future will be limited and those benefits won't be realized. And so it's for this reason that we're really seeking to work with Indigenous communities and the BC government to put in place a sustainable framework to promote and attract investment needed to continue to innovate, so that companies like those on the stage can continue to be partners to improve the systems and the methods and the practices associated with developing BC's resources, both for local but also for global benefit.
Go, Richard.
Thank you. That's some great context, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by just thanking our Indigenous host for welcoming us here, and conference organizers for bringing us all together for these important conversations. The breadth of attendees here in representation from Indigenous communities to government and industry shows the commitment to responsible resource development and advancing the important discussions and dialogues that we need to have. As mentioned, by way of background, my name is Cam Anderson, Senior Vice President of Commercial at NorthRiver Midstream. NorthRiver is a midstream gas gathering and processing business with operations that span almost the entirety of the Montney Play in northeast BC and into northwest Alberta. For perspective, our operations process approximately 20% of BC's natural gas every year, and our assets have been operating safely and reliably in northeast BC for decades, but NorthRiver is a relatively new company, having acquired the assets in 2018. NorthRiver represents a unique and specialized part of BC's natural gas value chain. Midstream's unique in that we don't own the molecule of natural gas that we gather and process. Rather, we take possession of raw gas at the inlets to our gas gathering pipelines and facilities and turn it into saleable natural gas and natural gas liquids. Midstream plays an important part in value creation for the province. We add value through the extraction of high-value natural gas liquids from the raw gas that we process, and we provide our customers with connection to critical downstream infrastructure and markets that help them maximize the value of their commodities. NorthRiver's assets have a long history of safe and reliable operation in Northeast BC, and we are now looking to leverage those assets as a platform to help further decarbonize the production of natural gas and to produce low-emission fuels. This requires looking at our existing assets, operations, and relationships through a different and innovative lens. For us to continue to innovate and grow, we understand the importance of partnership and collaboration with Indigenous communities, increased collaboration with with industry partners, and looking at our assets in new ways and innovative ways to identify emission reduction opportunities. For example, this approach of innovated has resulted in NorthRiver identifying projects which we're in the process of implementing that will reduce our carbon emissions by up to 400,000 tons per year. In 2021, we were lucky enough to receive BC government funding for support of 4 projects which are expected to reduce our emissions by over 2 million tons per annum through 2031. We have clearly heard from stakeholders that there's a need to decarbonize BC's natural gas production. The innovation that continues to drive low carbon production of natural gas is a key enabler of energy security for Canada and our allies globally. There has never been a more important time to think differently, work together, and ensure Canada continues to be the leader in responsible natural gas production.
Great, thanks, Cam. Jennifer.
Thanks very much. It's great to be back here in Prince George. Appreciate seeing all of your faces again. And I also appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the Ovintiv story. Ovintiv's one of the oldest and largest oil and gas producers in North America. We make modern life possible, and our products fuel the world. We're committed to driving progress and improving lives with respect and responsibility, not just in the communities where we operate, but for everyone. Our operations today span the Montney in BC and Alberta, and the Permian and Anadarko basins in the United States. We're the largest operator in the Montney, and we have deep roots in the communities where we operate, as well as Dawson Creek. We are also leaders in upstream electrification. Sorry, we were up late last night at the CAPP party. We've been leaders in upstream electrification for over a decade, with the majority of our field processing powered by grid electricity in both BC and Alberta. We're responsible for over 1 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas production in British Columbia. It's about 20% of the province's total. And our assets in the BC Montney are developed in partnership with a subsidiary of Mitsubishi Corporation, an equity partner in LNG Canada. In 2021, we committed to fully align with the World Bank Zero Routine Flaring Initiative and set targets to reduce our corporate methane emissions intensity by 33%, and we beat that goal 4 years early. We're currently tracking at around 50% and counting. So we set a new goal. Because that's what we do. In 2022, we set a new goal to reduce our corporate Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, compared to 2019 levels. Today, we're at around 30%, with line of sight to achieving our goals. We set targets in all parts of our organization to drive performance, and emissions reduction is just one of them. Those targets are tied to compensation, ensuring that all employees are invested in delivering on the outcomes. We also use emissions intensity to measure our progress. It's the volume of emissions it takes to generate a unit of production. We do that because it provides a more consistent story and a bigger picture compared to absolute emission reductions alone. And it allows us to benchmark against our peers and other sectors, and also identify decarbonization pathways and priorities. Innovation has been a driving force behind Ovintiv's evolution. It's in our DNA. Innovation, operational efficiency, and sustainability go hand in hand. Horizontal drilling is a good example. It allows us to access the same amount of reservoir as multiple vertical wells. It's not a new technology, but we're continually advancing ways to drill longer lateral wellbores and optimize production. A lot of these opportunities and innovations occur underground, and we'll talk a lot more, probably all of us, about the innovations that are occurring above ground, because we can see them, and it's kind of sexy. But in the innovations that are below ground enable us, in our BC Montney operations in particular, to drill 65 new wells today in comparison to what would have taken 100 new wells just a few years ago. So we emphasize innovation through all parts of our organization, from finance to procurement to obviously operations, and how we engage with Indigenous partners and stakeholders. I look forward to sharing some more of those stories with you today. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Jennifer. That's an impressive track record, and I think we all feel your pain from staying up late last night and having a very early morning. All right, Scott, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, and I really appreciate being here. My name is Scott Volk. I'm the Director of Technology and Innovation at Tourmaline. For those of you that don't know Tourmaline, Tourmaline is Canada's largest natural gas producer. We're a proudly Canadian company. We have operations across Western Canada, in Alberta Deep Basin, in Peace River Oil Play, and then in Northeast BC as well. We're really blessed with great assets, especially the assets in Northeast BC, where we get a huge amount of production from very little amount of inputs. So being blessed with these great assets allows us to show how efficiency can really improve performance and environmental performance in our assets. Aside from being Canada's largest natural gas producer, we're also a very large midstream company. We're Canada's 4th largest midstream company. And we're quite proud to be in a situation where we control our entire profile. It helps us a lot on our emissions performance and on our innovation ecosystem. Since today's talk is about innovation, we can kind of chat about how Tourmaline sees innovation and how we structure it. We see innovation in pillars of things we're focusing on today, and then this world of building blocks out for the future. So the pillars that Tourmaline's working on today are methane detection and avoidance, diesel displacement. We're highly focused on diesel displacement. We're now at the point where we've displaced over 65 million liters of diesel fuel. The other pillar we're focused on is energy efficiency. So we've kind of dissected our entire operation and gone through it and found ways where we can become more efficient and therefore more sustainable with less emissions. So those types of things are things like waste heat recovery that we're already capturing over 42 megawatts of waste heat from our facilities, which is just free energy that no longer needs to be produced, which is incredibly valuable. And then last but not least, as far as the actions of today, we're highly focused on water recycling. We recycle over 95% of our water. BC is where we've really focused our water recycling initiatives. It's required a large amount of infrastructure and a large amount of innovation to get to that point, but it saves a huge amount of trucks off the road, and it has a huge benefit to the environment as well. And then, like many companies, we've also are focusing our innovation portfolio on things like the building blocks of the future. So we are doing research into things like carbon capture, blue hydrogen production, some renewable natural gas, and future work on expanding our diesel displacement initiatives into further things like transportation as well. So I'm very excited to be here, very excited to get into all the questions and all the interactions on the innovation ecospace, especially in the upstream and midstream world.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to get to the question and discussion portion of our panel. We have a few questions that we're going to pose on stage, 3 questions, and we'll spend about 10 minutes covering those, and then we'll pass it over to some of our audience questions on WUVA. So to start us off, the first question is, what is the natural gas industry doing to reduce emissions in the upstream? And specifically, we're looking for examples of practices and technologies that your organization or organizations in the sector are adopting and pursuing to substantially decarbonize your operations. So I've kept it open. Who would like to go first? Who would like to kick it off?
Sure, I'm
Thanks,
happy
Cam.
to kick it off, sure.
Wonderful.
So I would say my perspective on this one is, and what we're working through in our organization is we're employing every tool in the toolbox to reduce our emissions and our impact on the environment, and really echo a lot of the comments that Scott made in his opening remarks on looking at everything from waste heat recovery projects that is free energy that reduces natural gas consumption in our operations, through to fuel switching opportunities. Obviously, one of the great advantages of natural gas production in BC is the carbon intensity of the BC electricity grid. So being able to electrify large portions of our energy demand at our facilities is a big advantage to BC natural gas production. And then we're looking at the same things too, the home runs from looking at large-scale post-combustion capture to CCS to blue hydrogen production as well. So when we think about what we're doing to decarbonize, we're really focused on the near term, but also investing a lot of time and effort in the long term. I'm a huge baseball fan by nature, and we have a motto within our sustainability group that I always like to tell is singles score runs too. When we think about innovation, we often think about the large scale transformational changes, but as we've heard from both Jennifer and Scott, our partners in Tourmaline and Ovintiv have been very successful in reducing Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and as have we, by just employing technology that's proven and working today, such as waste heat. And maybe to put that into perspective, waste heat's a good example. We're currently undertaking a waste heat recovery project at one of our facilities in Northeast BC that will displace the equivalent natural gas consumption as many of the large-scale proposed RNG projects that you read about in the newspapers without any impact to footprint or any other environmental considerations. So there's lots of efficiency gains out there that are having really meaningful impacts on our ability to decarbonize.
Sure, I can add on to that. When I did the intro, I kind of talked about how we have the 4 pillars and the building blocks, and to kind of get into specifics about what we do in those pillars, I can kind of use a couple examples. So we operate the Natural Gas Innovation Fund Emission Testing Center, and that testing center is focused on methane technologies. So what we are is a platform for clean technologies to come to our testing center and become validated. So we do a lot of work on all sorts of things. And I think it's kind of underestimated how incredible the methane detection and how much innovation has happened across the whole ecosystem in that space. At the testing center, we've got things from testing satellites to fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters and drones, some truck-mounted equipment. We've got continuous monitors out that can measure to the parts per billion. Like, we're now at the point where we can fly an aircraft over top of a home and find if the barbecue's not lit. So the innovation that's happened in that space has just been incredible, and Tourmaline's very proud to be a part of it and really driving it as well. And then I think the other piece that I think is really important to us is the diesel displacement. So we're now at the point where all of our rigs have at least some amount of natural gas. We have one rig that's electric, so we can hook it up on highline power. And we've put a lot of effort into innovation in that space as well. We've partnered with Precision Drilling and Caterpillar. We've managed to build a hybrid drilling rig that uses a 1 megawatt battery pack and can operate like a Prius car and actually store energy and allow us to get to 100% natural gas. So that's been incredible. And the same thing has happened on the completion side. We're the first company to bring in Tier 4 frac fleets, which has allowed us to get up to 75–80% natural gas displacement as well. So that it takes a whole bunch of individual things. The singles not all home runs in order to have great performance numbers. And those things have allowed us to do that. And even better, we're now at the point where we can prove all these things by certifying our natural gas and showing carbon intensity. So doing the real things today has made an incredible difference, and we're now at the point where we're not just doing them, but we can prove it, and we're certified to be low emissions natural gas as well.
If it's not apparent, we spend a lot of time talking amongst each other and sharing information on emissions reduction technologies. We see this as a non-competitive space and are very transparent so that we can advance the lowest cost, highest emission reduction opportunities with existing operable technologies today. Some of the things that we're particularly doing, I mentioned we're leaders in upstream electrification. Our 3 largest plants in and around the Dawson Creek area are electrified. They avoid up to 860,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions every year. We're tackling methane slip in our compressor engines for more complete combustion, and that's due to recent improvements in engine efficiency and combustion technologies. We have also deployed 100% natural gas-powered frac fleet in our operations, and we expect that to reduce completions emissions by 30%, and also to reduce surface disturbance by 25 to 30%, and reduce significant noise and traffic because there's less equipment on our sites. We've tested grid electricity to power our drilling operations in the United States. There are different barriers to implementation of electrification and drilling completion operations in different jurisdictions, but assuming infrastructure existed to supply it, managing the demand variability for temporary power-intensive operations is a real struggle for electricity providers. So that, in terms of a scalable technique, is a really long way out.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add.
Please do.
First off, it's always really interesting to hear about all the stuff that's happening in industry. I'm an engineer by training, so I love kind of geeking out on all of the up-and-coming stuff that's happening. But I guess also, I just wanted to kind of highlight too, I think from our industry's perspective, you know, there's a recognition that we must address climate change so that we can play a bigger role in that to meet that global demand for oil and natural gas. And I think that what you're hearing is, you know, the innovation that's happening is being driven out of the fact that we want to be able to produce lower emission oil and natural gas so that we can have a competitive advantage. So if you want to get the economic benefits, you need to reach the environment. You need to achieve those environmental goals. And so I think in the context of BC, I would just highlight that, you know, reducing emissions in the upstream, and Jen in particular mentioned upstream electrification. There's really a great opportunity for us to realize that generational LNG opportunity. BC can be producing some of the lowest emission LNG in the world and targeting it towards markets that today are burning much more emissions intensive fuels. And so in this way, BC LNG can contribute to significantly lowering global emissions while still being a source of jobs and resource revenues and prosperity for British Columbians.
Great, thanks very much, everybody. I think some pretty powerful responses about how the sector is being extremely proactive in addressing innovation when it comes to climate change, and I think that wraps it up very nicely. Richard, your comments on LNG. Okay, so that brings us to the second question, and that is, what can governments do to support and incentivize the natural gas production industry in driving innovation and tackling emissions reduction, attracting investment to help the sector, to really make sure that industry contributors like yourselves meet the overall objectives on the path to net zero? You want to go first?
Yeah, maybe I'll
Great.
go first.
Thanks, Richard.
I guess we have a bit of a phenomenon in Canada where, and I say this as a policy person, where regulatory and policy challenges kind of keep stacking up or maybe pancaking. And you know, I think while it's important that we have policies in place that work to reduce emissions in the most flexible and efficient way possible, and that we have standards in place to ensure that projects are being built to stringent regulatory standards, we also have a system where new policy and regulatory hurdles are sometimes being added that don't necessarily work together and ultimately serve to drive away some of the investment, not just within our industry, but also within the clean tech industry, which helps to support a lot of the innovation, which you've heard about from some of my colleagues here. So I think in that regard, it's really important for governments, both federal and provincial, to work together to incent and to encourage clean technology development as much as possible, because ultimately we're competing with other countries. Folks may or may not be aware, but the United States in September 2022 passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which was really a landmark piece of legislation that put in place, multiple different incentives to really encourage the development of clean technologies, including things like carbon capture utilization and storage. And so, while the US has taken this approach of kind of what some have characterized as a basket of carrots in the form of incentives, the Canadian government has taken some initial steps in that space with the investment tax credit for CCUS. But overall, there's more that can be done in that space. So I think at a high level anyways, greater collaboration between provincial and federal governments is really important so that the climate and policy frameworks that we put in place can be complementary and really create a business environment that's both protective from an environmental perspective, but also sustainable in the long term, and that will ultimately attract investment to allow that innovation to continue to happen.
Great, thanks very much, Richard. Yes, collaboration between provincial and federal governments is certainly an important part of that. Anybody else?
Sure, I can jump in there. I kind of think of it maybe a little bit too simply. Like, policy needs to be flexible and enabling, especially when we're talking about innovation. So when I'm talking about flexibility, we see different issues and different problems, and our industry is incredibly diverse, and there isn't one silver bullet that solves all these problems. So Ovintiv has electricity nearby. Electrification is a good solution for their issues. We've got remote sites where electrification isn't an option, so we're doing other things like waste heat recovery and looking at carbon capture and kind of alternatives as well. So the policy needs to be flexible to allow all sorts of different approaches and all sorts of different technologies and all sorts of different things to be there to help solve these problems. If it was just specifically you must electrify, then that option just doesn't exist everywhere. And we're pro-electrification. We've got the drilling rig that's electrified, and we can only do that in one place because that's the only place that enables that technology. And then the enabling part is mostly enabling for the clean tech sector. As industry, we're not necessarily looking for any handouts or anything, but we do need that clean tech sector to thrive. And you've got this brave souls that are mortgaging their houses and deciding they want to go do something different, and they need a support system. Right now, we typically bring BC technology into Alberta, develop it, and bring it up just because that ecosystem's a little bit stronger in Alberta. And it would be incredible to have those local BC businesses developed right here home in BC and thrive in BC the whole way through as well.
Those are great points, smart and informed policy. Jennifer?
I might take a bit more tactical approach to this question. Lean into output-based pricing systems. Award outperformers and penalize underperformers. BC's Clean BC does a pretty good job of that, but you could go further. You could, for instance, enable outperformers to generate performance credits, and that would promote them to, for facilities that are already outperforming benchmarks, it would promote them to outperform even more, get closer to zero. And for new facilities, it would support designing them to outperform from the get-go. As Scott mentioned, we have projects that we're progressing in Alberta that are uneconomic in BC. And so we're eliminating those emissions in Alberta today because we have the opportunity to generate carbon offset credits to mitigate increased operating costs. And unfortunately, until costs and other conditions are improved in BC, they'll be sitting on the sidelines there. So those are kind of more tactical pieces. In addition, just respect to, how we get to net zero. Transparent, collaborative, realistic modeling that recognizes existing pathways and the next generation technologies that it will take to get there, including strategic investments in electrification and carbon capture infrastructure. And as Scott said, a more performance-based regulatory framework. The emissions reductions that Ovintiv have achieved to date have been market-driven. So I would just encourage policy to continue in that direction.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Cam, did you want to make a comment here?
Yeah, definitely. I think Jennifer and Scott said it very well, articulated a lot of the same points that I would. I would maybe just add, definitely continue to support and strengthen effective programs. There are effective programs that are helping us to decarbonize in BC, for example, the Clean BC Industry Fund. And as both Jennifer and Scott mentioned, being agnostic to the pathways to decarbonization, there can't be a one-size-fits-all. And maybe the other theme that I would add here is just the importance of long-term certainty in policy. So especially as we start to cross off the list sort of the more of the low-hanging fruit, smaller capital projects, and we start to think about the larger scale, more transformational emission reduction opportunities like post-combustion capture. These are not projects that pay out in 2 years. These are projects that pay out in a decade or more, and so having certainty on policy and support for those types of investments are going to be very critical going forward. Yeah,
definitely. Long-term certainty is key when you're putting forward that type of project. Okay, so we're going to get to our last question here, and it has to do with our partnerships with First Nations. So with innovating in pursuit of responsible natural gas development, how are your organizations finding new ways together to work together with Indigenous communities, and specifically maybe taking a moment or two to talk about your upstream oil and gas sector engaging with the people and building the partners. So maybe a few examples around that.
Sure, maybe I'll start. I really liked Minister Bailey's remarks this morning around what she considers to be innovation. I think very often we think about innovation in the context of the development of new technologies or new widgets that do things differently. But if we take a broader view of innovation, it's kind of taking a look at how we can do things differently than we did before, more efficiently, more effectively, more fairly. So I talked a little bit in the opening about some of the recent work that we did to kind of understand where our BC supply chain comes from. And I think it really demonstrates that the BC industry has really taken a lead in this regard. Aligned with the DRIPA action plan to create opportunities for Indigenous peoples to be full partners in the economy, I think that we've really seen the BC natural gas sector stepping up in that space. Our report showed that BC's natural gas sector spent about $540 million with about 100 BC-based Indigenous affiliated businesses and organizations between 2018 and 2021. On average, the proportion of Indigenous affiliated vendors was actually about 11.5% of BC's total supply chain, and that percent actually increased quite substantially from under 7% in 2018 to actually over 15% in 2021. So we're certainly moving in a really positive direction, and it's particularly striking given that encompassed kind of 2 years of pandemic time when we had really significant commodity price challenges and capital spending pullbacks. And just for comparison, the Government of Canada is striving for a minimum 5% of the total value of their public contracts to be held by Indigenous vendors effective 2024. So in BC, we're well ahead of that benchmark. And I guess the last thing that I'll just mention is, through our study, we saw a really significant diversity in Indigenous businesses across the province. across the 17 categories of goods and materials and services that we looked at, Indigenous businesses were well represented in all of those. And so, I think that there's a lot of positive initial steps. I'm sure that these folks probably have some good examples that they could share.
Great, thanks, Richard. Cam, Jennifer, you talk about a few examples really quickly?
Yeah, sure. I can just say that we definitely approach opportunities with an open mind, with a focus on building mutually beneficial relationships. Any project that we evaluate to undertake, we always like to first stop and think about how we can present meaningful participation and opportunities for those projects with our Indigenous partners and communities.
So we know that listening and learning and being present is important to being a good partner. And meeting communities where they're at and spending the time to understand where they want to be so that we can develop the inclusive procurement and employment strategies internally to support that, as well as support resilient communities through investments in training, capacity building, education, as well as cultural preservation and wellness. If there are any Treaty 8 chiefs, councillors, elders, community members, I just wanted to extend a thank you on behalf of Ovintiv for including us in your cultural events. These are really meaningful opportunities to build deeper bonds, not just on organizational basis, but on individual basis. Some of the things that we've been doing this past year and through COVID even is offering operational tours to community members to demonstrate transparently our business practices and to really understand interests and concerns and how we can work together. We're also developing a virtual tour tool, say that 5 times fast, to enable demonstration of different techniques over time and of remote sites that may be inaccessible. Those also allow us to include other community members beyond just chiefs and council and the lands or economic development offices.
Great, thanks very much, Jennifer.
Sure,
Scott.
I'll jump in there as well. I think as the rest of the panel said, innovation has kind of changed a little bit. Sometimes it's tech and sometimes it's an approach. And I propose as an approach, we've gotten much more to relationships and partnerships, which has been really valuable in this space. But we do also have examples of the technical innovation. I mentioned before that diesel displacement is important to Tourmaline. We worked with First Nations businesses, kind of explained our goals and how we'd like to be focused on tech and innovation around that space. And one of those First Nations businesses decided that they'd like to invest into natural gas power generation, especially around drill sites and completions. And we've kind of worked with them and developed that technology. So now we've got this incredible system where we've got new clean tech innovation happening on the space, collaborating with our community and our partners, and doing something better and hitting Tourmaline goals that are very important to us as well. So it's kind of a win-win-win on all fronts.
I love that phrase, win-win-win. It's simple, but it's to the point, and it really shows, I think that the drive towards, improving and building those deep relationships, and that's really what it's all about, is when you're going forward with doing that. So, okay, so we've got literally 3 minutes left to go. I did promise a question from the audience, so we'll take the top voted one. There's talk of what U.S. consumes for gas, but what are the amounts required for Canada, and more specifically British Columbia, as this is where the majority of resources comes from? Who wants to take this one on?
So I can speak a bit to this. I guess the key challenge that we have here in Canada is we have a very vast supply of natural resources in natural gas and oil. And while there is domestic consumption of those resources, in order to realize the full value, we need to be able to reach markets that demand and that need those resources as well. And that's why you continue to hear about kind of market access as being such a significant challenge for the industry. In the context of BC, and in particular with respect to natural gas and LNG, I think, as I said earlier, we have a generational opportunity now to supply natural gas, and in particular low carbon LNG, to places that need it now, and to kind of seize on that opportunity to become a global energy hub. So I think that's really the key. There certainly will be a domestic need for our resources, but there are also a lot of other folks out there who could benefit from them as well.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to jump in on this one?
I just see some other questions there that are kind of leading more towards, by supplying other markets, are we going to end up with a domestic shortage? That's not the case. As Richard mentioned, we have a huge amount of world-class resource here, over 100 years worth of natural gas production available, and that's based on current exploitation techniques. So as we continue to innovate downhole, our ability to access more resources means there's just a longer time frame there.
Yeah, and I would say that's interesting, and that's where BC is differentiated from a lot of the other plays that south of the border. If you look at well productivity in Northeast BC, we haven't hit our peak yet, and operators like Tourmaline and Ovintiv continue to innovate and get more and more production and more productivity out of each well, versus some of the major plays in the U.S. that are on the decline. So yeah, I think when it comes to worrying about natural gas, especially in Northeast BC, there's no shortage of it, and there's always the Horn River as well.
All right, you're good.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Tourmaline, if you look on our website, that you'll see years and years and years of inventory. We're looking forward to exports, and we're able to grow production in a clean and sustainable way to meet the demand of export. So there'd be no fears of any issues as far as production in BC or gas for BC. We'll have ample supply for everyone.
Great question, and it's very timely, so thanks very much for putting it forward, especially with the geopolitics in the last year. It's become a lot more poignant. I think we'll just tackle one more question. It sounds like we have a few more minutes than I thought. So in light of the continually changing landscape due to climate change, what are the most concerning issues for the industry? I see you, Richard.
Sure. Yeah. Why don't I start again? I think there are a multitude of challenges that we need to work through. I think, given the amount of innovation that's focused on addressing climate change at the moment, I think that it's fair to say that that's really the industry's kind of key area of focus, so that we can continue to play a role in meeting global demand for oil and natural gas. And so, I think that we've seen over the past 20 years that BC's natural gas production has doubled, while total emissions have remained level or actually decreased a bit, and so our overall emissions intensity has actually gone down. And you've heard a lot about a lot of the measures that these companies are putting in place to work with governments and regulators and academics to reduce emissions from venting and flaring and fugitive emissions. And so I think that that's certainly the biggest nut to crack, as it were. But there are other considerations too. There are surface access considerations. There are market access considerations. But we'll get there.
And I'd add on that likely our biggest issue or biggest concern is also our biggest opportunity, in that there is a huge concern about making sure that the future has clean and responsible energy. And that's something that is a concern with all fossil fuels, that we do need to make them cleaner. But it is also the huge opportunity that BC has, because it's the best resource as far as being able to make it cleaner and better, and also to be able to export it. There's really nowhere else in the world where you can hit the emissions intensities that we're hitting in BC today, and we've already got the policy and the regulations in place to keep that a continuous improvement model. So I would say our biggest challenge is also our biggest opportunity, because I believe soon BC will be known as that clean molecule that's able to displace other fuels from around the world that really doesn't have that same opportunity.
Okay, Well, thank you very much for the questions. And so I think what we'll do is spend the last few minutes just with some closing remarks and comments. We've had the chance to review the use of some of the technologies that have been involved with innovation and increasing efficiencies, diesel displacements. We're looking at increased electrification, and really the clear and very key importance of government incentivizing the sector as it continues to drive towards improvement. It's very proactive, I would say, in itself, and given the examples that we've had on stage, but that collaboration from government is absolutely key, especially in the short to medium and very long-term projects that we were talking about. And then finally, we can't do anything without those really strong partnerships with First Nations people, and making sure that we continue to improve on that. We build these deeper bonds as we go forward and as we drive into our future. So with that, I would like to once again pass the floor over to the panel for their closing comments.
Sure. I'm hoping from what we said today that people get the idea of all the hard work that's gone in this space and how much work we've been putting into clean tech innovation, and to kind of just let people know it's just the beginning. We're dug in with both feet, and we're working hard at this. So I would say that's kind of the closing marks that I would like people to know, is that our industry's taking it seriously, our company's taking it seriously, and we've come a long ways, and we're going a long ways from here.
Yeah, I would echo that, Scott. Obviously, thanks to everyone for listening, and I would echo the same comment that this is definitely a focus of our company and our owner, and we see the importance of decarbonization, and we're only just at the beginning of this story and are excited about where we as an industry can get to, especially with the amount of collaboration that's occurring amongst industry and government and Indigenous partners.
Natural gas is an important part of the energy transition, and it will be for a long time. BC's world-class resources, paired with unprecedented partnerships with Indigenous communities, these are the products that should displace higher carbon intensity energy at home and around the world. These are the things that keep us warm, fed, healthy, and connected. And we can do this with responsibility and respect, and environmental and social commitments. As Scott said, as Cam said, look at us go. Like, you just can't stop us. Allow the market and our shareholders to dictate performance expectations, and we're going to beat it every time. Thanks.
That's a hard one to beat. Richard, go for it.
Yeah, Jen stole my thunder. Well, I guess first off, I just want to thank my fellow panelists, and also you, Susan, for moderating. But I think just, reiterating the incredible opportunity to help export some of the lowest carbon LNG is really what I want folks to take away from this talk today. I think if there's one thing that we learned in 2022, it's that global energy security is fragile, but it's not an excuse not to act on climate. And so, as you've heard, I think that there are a lot of real solutions, great solutions that are being implemented that can help to drive down emissions in the BC natural gas sector. And there are a lot of benefits in terms of becoming a decarbonized energy hub. For a town like Fort St. John, $2.5 billion worth of spending means a lot, and spending almost 12% contracting with Indigenous businesses is very important. So, if I kind of come back to the opening remarks, it comes down to responsible development. And for us, that means making progress on climate so that we can remain a source of prosperity ultimately for everyone in the province.
Great, thank you very much to the panel. I just love these discussions on innovation. I really do. I think that they're so uplifting, and I think that you gave some really great positive and hopeful examples of the work that you're doing and the plans for the future. Thank you again to the panel. Great discussion, and thank you to all of you for joining us today and for posing those questions. Enjoy the rest of the forum.